As Donald Trump prepares to take office in the United States, our neighbors up north are also in the midst of an election. Up next on Beyond Today's Headlines, why Justin Trudeau is stepping down and what that means for Canada. Justin Trudeau has been the Prime Minister of Canada for the last decade. He's been the Prime Minister since the Liberal Party took office in 2015, so I had a chat with David Youngren, a correspondent at Reuters Canada.
Canada has, like other countries, like the States, has a fixed date election law, which means that elections have to be held every 4 years. So the scheduled date for the next Canadian election is October the 20th this year, 2025. The challenge is that Prime Minister Trudeau only has a minority government, which means that if all the opposition parties in the House of Commons, which is the elected chamber, if all the opposition parties vote against him, he is defeated. And we are expecting that vote to happen at the end of March, which means the election will be, in theory, sometime in May, possibly the second Monday in May. So on paper, it'll be October 20th, but his position is so weak that it's going to be sometime in May, we think.
What are the events that led to Trudeau's resignation?
Just a word of background here. I mean, in the Canadian political system, regardless of how well you are deemed to have done, after about 9 years, people get fed up with you and they want to see a different face in charge. So the last three Canadian governments have all the prime ministers have all been in power about 9.5 years, and then they've left. So okay, there are unique circumstances to why Prime Minister Trudeau is in trouble, but he first came to power in November 2015. So, by the traditional Canadian timetable, he should be in trouble, and he is in trouble. So, I don't want your listeners to think that there is something really extraordinary about this, because his time is kind of up.
So it's just the normal life cycle of events then.
Is the normal life cycle of Canadian politics. Now, that said, he won re-election for the second time in 2021, only with a minority government. And in the Canadian system, that means that you rely on other parties to keep you alive. So he had an agreement with another left-leaning party, a smaller left-leaning party, the New Democrats in the Canadian House of Commons, to basically they would support him on crucial votes. And they announced last year that they were fed up with this and they were going to pull their automatic support. And from that moment on, at a time when he was already increasingly unpopular, you could start to hear clocks ticking. His challenge is that he has become overexposed. So during COVID, he gave daily news conferences for months on end, explaining to Canadians what the government was doing, the good bits, the bad bits. His legislators told us that the more he appeared, the greater the number of complaints they were hearing on doorsteps when they banged on doors. That they basically people were seeing too much of him. So already he was kind of running into problems. He was running into problems with the clock because he'd been in power quite a long time. People were kind of fed up with seeing him. He was in a weakened political position. He is known, and this is no surprise, and I'm not making a comment here that will surprise anyone, but he is known for his stubbornness and known for his determination that regardless of the challenge in front of him, he can overcome it. So last summer, there was one instance where there was what they call a special election. Someone stepped down in Toronto in one of the safest seats the Liberals have across the entire country, and they lost. And the grumbling amongst the backbench members of parliament in the ruling Liberal Party really began to take off. And people really thought, can we win the next election with Trudeau in charge? And then in September, there was another special election in Montreal, again in one of the safest seats the Liberals have in the entire country, and they lost again. And so it's like a snowball effect, and the more and more and more unhappiness. And then he thought, well, perhaps one way to get over this, given that people are suffering from from inflation caused by COVID, and that's another big factor. We've seen it in the States, Germany, France, elsewhere. Voters very unhappy about the spike in prices of basic foodstuffs. Perhaps we can improve our chances at the polls if we basically give people a bunch of tax breaks. And the finance minister, Christopher Freeland, who had been one of his closest allies in Parliament for almost 10 years, behind the scenes said, look, the books aren't looking so great. We don't want to be cutting taxes anymore because we're going to end up with a fiscal problem. He overruled her and then informed her on one particular Friday that he no longer wanted her to be finance minister and would she please accept a less important post. And on Monday, she quit and wrote a letter attacking his, quote, political gimmicks, unquote. And that was the end. I mean, if you lose your finance minister, you're done. And he lost his finance minister in December, and a month later, he finally came to the conclusion that he really wasn't in a position to take the party to victory and quit. The challenge is he quit at a very inopportune time. President-elect Trump is coming into office on January 20th, promising to impose a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada, which is going to cause great economic damage in Canada, which would cause great economic damage if he goes through with this threat. And you have the Canadian government basically paralyzed.
I do want to bring up 2 points in response to what you had all just said. I just want to reiterate. So he was trying to cut taxes, and this was supposed to alleviate some of the pressure caused by inflation. That's not usually a liberal-leaning policy, right? To cut taxes. Usually it's the other way around. So that had to cause a lot of tension, right?
Well, not really, because if you're in power, the main focus is to stay in power. I do not, as a Reuters journalist, want to be using the word bribe because the word bribe has very negative connotations. However, a lot of other people who are not me did use the word bribe. So the challenge that they had, as leaders in other countries had, was that prices during the start of the COVID pandemic rocketed. And I think it's fair to say that Mr. Trudeau's Liberal Party was a little bit slow to acknowledge the hurt this was causing the average voter. So belatedly, they decided that perhaps we can make people's lives easier over Christmas by temporarily eliminating the sales tax on a bunch of goods that people might want to buy over Christmas, like toys and Christmas trees and the rest of it. And what they also wanted to do, what they also planned to do, was to send out rebate checks. You know, every single voter in Canada who fitted into a certain category would get a few $100 back starting next spring, which coincidentally is not too far away from the date of the next election. And this was widely panned. So the finance minister who quit basically wrote Trudeau a letter saying, look, this is a gimmick. This is not serious. If President Trump does come to power and impose tariffs on Canadian imports, that's going to cripple the economy. We need to have a reserve of cash ready to deal with the side effects of Trump's tariffs. And Trudeau's team overruled her and said, no, we're going to go ahead with the cuts. We're going to go ahead with the cut to taxes. We're going to go ahead with the checks. And she quit. And this came as a huge surprise to everyone and basically spelled the end of the government. Opinion polls for the last 18 months have shown that the Liberals who are in power now are facing a huge defeat in the next election. The main opposition party is the Conservative Party, which is a right-of-centre party which wants to cut government spending, cut taxes. It's the same program we've heard from right-leaning parties in countries around the world. And I think it's fair to say that people tend to indicate, the polls tend to indicate that people will be voting against Trudeau and his Liberal Party as opposed to for the opposition Conservative Party.
Who are the front runners to whether it succeed Trudeau, and what does the Conservative Party look like?
One of the main focuses of the Trudeau government was the environment and global warming. So they imposed a national carbon tax, which is due to increase later this year, to try to kind of shift people away from burning up the environment by using large trucks or whatever into more responsible behavior. Now, this hasn't really increased the daily cost of living of people very much because most people get a rebate check. So they boosted the carbon tax, but the population gets a check that basically kind of cancels this out, but it's a nudging in the right direction. The Conservatives do not like this at all. They have vowed to cancel it. So what's going to happen, I think, is that the Conservatives are going to come to power. They're going to cancel the carbon tax, which is one of the main thrusts. This is a costly tax. You're paying more than you need to do for home heating oil, fuel, and the rest of it. And don't forget, regardless of global warming, Canada is a very cold country, and people spend a lot of money heating their houses in the winter. So if you can promise people that the increase that's going to happen to your fuel costs isn't going to happen, well, you can see how that might be attractive politically. So the conservatives are coming in with a promise to axe the tax, as they say. They're going to kill off the carbon tax. The people running to replace Trudeau won't know the result until March the 9th, but it is already becoming pretty clear that the race is going to be between the finance minister who quit, Chrysler Freeland, and the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney. He has no political experience. He is not a member of the parliament, but he has a reputation for knowing what happens in an economy. He has a very prestigious reputation as someone who can. He has a reputation of being someone who knows how an economy works. Because the criticism of Trudeau is that basically he spent a huge amount of money on social programs. Trudeau is left-leaning. He's a feminist. He wants to get women back in the workforce, and as I'm sure is the case in the States, as in the case in Canada, one of the biggest hurdles to getting women back in the workforce is the high cost of childcare. So, at a cost of several $billions, the current Liberal government has pushed through a national program which basically promises people that they wouldn't pay more than $10 a day in childcare.
Oh, sounds great. Sign me up.
Yeah, no. So the challenge is, okay, I won't bore you and your listeners with the intricacies of Canadian constitutional governance, but it's not national in the sense that not every single person is eligible, but they have spent an awful lot of money putting this program into place partially. And if you believe the testimonials from around the country, a lot of women who otherwise would have been stuck at home taking care of their kids are now able to work because childcare is affordable. Now, the quid pro quo of this is that it costs an awful lot of money. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. The budget deficit is much higher than the Liberals promised it would be, and this is one of the reasons the opposition Conservatives have decided to attack Trudeau. Is that governments are supposed to run balanced budgets, and your deficit is big, and it's much bigger than you said it was going to be.
Okay, so if Trudeau is not necessarily well liked in or is facing a loss at the election, what are some things that Trudeau has done that whether it's good or bad, but what's his legacy going to be like in the future?
I would say that his legacy lies on two calamities that he steered Canada away from. So when President Trump came to power in January of 2017, he vowed to rip up the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, with Mexico and Canada because, quote, the Mexicans and the Canadians are taking advantage of the states, and we need to address this. Canada sends 75% of all goods and services exports to these states. The States is the single most important country for Canada by a country mile. So if you have President Trump coming in threatening literally the economic underpinning of your entire country, you need to do something about it. So the Canadians, working together with the Mexicans over a period of 15, 16 months of sometimes absolutely brutal negotiations, managed to recraft NAFTA into the new USMCA trade agreement and not really pay much of a price. Okay, certain sectors got thrown under the bus, but given the stakes, I think Trudeau and his team did exceedingly well. The second area where I think he did well is during COVID. When COVID struck, it was clear that the economy was in a lot of trouble. So they did two things. They mounted an all-out effort to get personal protective equipment and vaccines, and they also threw a lot of money at the economy, both at small businesses and individuals, just to give them enough cash to get through the worst of the pandemic so that they wouldn't find themselves either out of a job or out of a home. So I think his legacy lies on 2 points. They saved the economy by renegotiating NAFTA, and they saved the economy by keeping the economy alive, basically.
Earlier, we were talking a little bit about the NDP and its influence on what the Liberal Party has been able to do in Canada. Jagmeet Singh posted or released some scathing remarks about Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. He even at one point said that it doesn't matter who leads the Liberals, they don't deserve another chance. How does this fit into the election narrative that's going on? People have called it classless. So I'm wondering, does that impact the NDP's chances? Are people going to move over to or vote Liberal more, that have historically voted for the NDP, or does that not matter? Conservatives are just going to blow out of the water anyway.
I'd say 2 points. One, I think it's clear the Conservatives are going to win. Secondly, left of centre, left-leaning vote pool, however you want to describe it. People who would never vote Conservative have a choice. They can vote Liberal or they can vote New Democrat. And the NDP, the New Democrats, have traditionally been the minor party here. You vote Liberal and then some people vote New Democrat. Given Trudeau's troubles, it is clear that the New Democrats, who are traditionally the third or sometimes the fourth party in Parliament, they see a chance to become the main left of centre party. So this is a game that is playing out in the background. What the New Democrats, the New Democrats are not going to win. But if they can come second, and if they can supplant Trudeau and the Liberals as the main left-leaning party that people want to vote for, well, that's a huge triumph for them. So between 2011 and 2015, in fact, the New Democrats were the second largest party, and that was the first time it had ever happened, in part because the Liberals fell apart between 2006 and 2011. So to your point, the New Democrats, I think, are playing a long-term game here. They're clearly not going to win the next election. The Conservatives are going to win a big majority, but if the New Democrats can supplant the Liberals as the first choice of left-of-centre voters, well, then at some point, the the fatigue that we're now seeing with Trudeau is going to attach itself to the Conservatives. So in 8 or 9 years' time, the Conservatives will be voted out because people are fed up with them too. And then the New Democrats see this as the chance for them to shine and for the first time ever to become the governing party in Canada.
I want to talk about the relations between the United States and Canada. I know that Trudeau had, it seemed like, tried to just keep Canada together during Donald Trump's first term as president, which many had called, unstable. Just from a U.S. standpoint, it was very chaotic. Now that Donald Trump is going to be in a second term in the White House in the United States, I'm wondering, from Canada's perspective, how does what's going to likely be the Conservative Party, how's this going to impact the relations between the U.S. and Canada?
So the first time that Trump won and took power in 2017, I think it's fair to say that he spent a couple of years trying to figure out how the levers of powers worked here. And he had a bunch of experienced people who were supposed to provide guidance. So from a Canadian point of view, the first Trump administration, I wouldn't say they got a free pass because they didn't get a free pass, but Trump was trying to figure out how the system worked. And from a Canadian point of view, he spent a lot of time focused on things that weren't Canada, which is great. This time round, I think it's fair to say that he and his team have a much better idea of how the levers of power work and which ones to pull and which ones not to pull. And that puts the focus on Canada in a way that it wasn't before. So if the Conservatives take over in Canada, they are going to be faced with an administration that knows what it wants and how to get it. There is talk of retaliation. There is talk of cutting off oil supplies. There's talk of cutting off the supplies of rare minerals such as uranium and germanium and everything else. But the US is 10 times the size of Canada. It has 10 times the number of people, and the economy is 10 times the size of Canada's economy. So that kind of puts whoever wins the next election, that puts them in a pretty challenging position.
You can find David Youngren's work in our show notes. This was Beyond Today's Headlines, and I will see you again next week.